Welcome to this session, which is based on FDA's recent draft guidance for industry, use of electronic signatures in clinical investigations under 21 CFR Part 11, questions and answers. We will briefly discuss what this Part 11 draft guidance is and why it is important. Then we will dive into a review of the draft recommendations, including a discussion of outsourced electronic services and mobile technology. FDA published 21 CFR Part 11 Final Rule in March 1997. Part 11 applies when records which are required by a predicate rule are created, modified, maintained, archived, retrieved, or transmitted in electronic form in place of paper record, and also when electronic signatures are used in place of traditional handwritten signatures. The term predicate rule refers to Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act requirements including good laboratory practices, good manufacturing practices, and good clinical practices. As technology advanced, in 2003, FDA published a follow-up guidance, Part 11 Scope and Application, which emphasized a narrow and practical interpretation of Part 11 and encouraged a risk-based approach. Although the scope of this draft guidance indicates application to clinical investigational records, these requirements may also be applied as current industry standards to GLP and GMP electronic records, in addition to GCP records. FDA emphasizes continued intent to exercise enforcement discretion regarding Part 11 requirements and encourages and clarifies use of risk-based approach regarding electronic system validations. As technology continues to rapidly evolve, this draft guidance addresses how Part 11 applies to both commercial off-the-shelf COTS and customized computer systems, outsourced electronic services, also referred to as cloud computing services or software as a service, mobile technology or mobile apps, and telecommunication systems. FDA continues to encourage a risk-based approach to validating electronic systems that process critical records submitted to the FDA to ensure performance of intended function, whether owned or managed by a regulated entity, whether on-site or cloud-based. A risk-based approach should consider the purpose and significance of the record and the attributes and intended use. Office software such as word processing or portable document format systems typically involve minimal if any validation. Spreadsheets used for processing data require validation, including verification of calculations and confirmation that cell formulas are locked to prevent editing. For more advanced systems, utilize as applied. FDA expects validation to include a description of SOPs and vendor validation documentation that ensures function as intended. Possible examples could be an electronic data capture system for clinical or toxicology studies, or an inventory management system. Thorough in-house validation is required for systems that are configured to fit unique user needs or that are integrated with other systems. Comprehensive validation should include user acceptance testing, stress testing, and change control. System examples include a chromatography data system or an electronic clinical data management system. Validation of COTS was also strongly addressed recently in the United Kingdom's Medicine and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA, GXP Data Integrity Guidance published in March 2018. This guidance clearly states that the acceptance of vendor-supplied validation data in isolation of system configuration and users' intended use is not acceptable. It describes vendor testing as likely to be limited to functional verification only and to not fulfill performance qualifications since it is isolated from the end user's intended process or IT infrastructure. Thus, regulatory agencies are in agreement that for configured systems, vendor validation would only be a starting point for a comprehensive internal system validation for intended use. For electronic systems within the Part 11 scope, an FDA inspection will concentrate on the system implementation, including changes made to the system and documentation of validation to test system functionality. Points of concern are any source data that are transferred to another data format or system, and ensuring that critical data have not been altered in value or meaning. FDA will also look for SOPs and support mechanisms. The Part 11 draft guidance suggests periodic shared vendor audits conducted by trusted third parties along with a risk-based approach, prioritizing vendor audits for COTS that are configured to fit unique user needs or that are integrated with other systems. FDA evaluates electronic systems as part of its regulatory inspection process, routine or for cause. Although there are currently no preliminary audits or certification of e-systems, FDA intends to develop a pre-certification program which could replace or decrease the pre-market submission requirements for certain products. FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health, CDRH, is currently coordinating a voluntary software pre-certification pilot program. As described in FDA's Digital Health Innovation Action Plan, new guidances are under development to encourage digital health technology innovation. The recently published MHRA GXP Data Integrity Guidance also addresses IT vendors, including cloud computing service providers, and recommends a risk-based approach. For cloud or virtual services, the physical location of the data, including the impact of any applicable laws, should be considered. The contract should address responsibilities of the giver and acceptor and specify timely access to the data, metadata and audit trails to the data owner and regulated authorities, and stipulate archiving and continued readability of the data throughout the retention period, and arrange for business continuity, which should be tested. When an electronic copy is retained and the paper source destroyed, Part 11 regulations apply to the system creating and maintaining the copy. A certification process shall include verifying an exact copy possesses all information attributes from the original record, including color, tears, or ink blots. Examples of methods to apply Part 11 compliant electronic signatures include biometric, for example, through a fingerprint or eye, or non-biometric, requiring two-factor authentication with two distinct components such as entry of user ID and password, or use of a computer-readable ID card along with a password. FDA accepts true electronic copies of electronic records in either the same or compatible format. All the original content and meaning must be preserved, along with the metadata, which is the associated information describing the context and providing the understanding of the data. For example, date timestamp, operator identification, instrument ID, and records of changes, by whom, why, and when. Equipment for reading the record must also be maintained. The original electronic document should be designated in electronic copies generated through a validated process. FDA accepts durable electronic storage devices to archive required records. Regulated entities must ensure that the original data integrity, content, and meaning are preserved. For electronic records archived in a way to be searched, sorted, or analyzed, FDA requests the same capability during inspection if it is reasonable and technically feasible. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, defines cloud computing as a model for enabling ubiquitous, convenient, on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable computing resources, e.g. network, servers, storage, applications, and services that can be rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management effort or service provider interaction. To summarize, the concept involves as needed sharing of computing resources with hardware positioned remotely in potentially diverse geographic locations. Time and overhead costs are decreased through sharing headcount, expertise, hardware, space, and maintenance. Although FDI recognizes use of outsourced computing services, regulated entities must also consider the associated risk to ensure adequate controls are in place to protect data reliability and confidentiality. Factors to consider in determining suitability of outsourced electronic services include system validation documentation that includes across the system lifecycle and including change management and addressing features to be used. Ability to generate accurate and complete copies. Availability of records with content and meaning preserved throughout the required retention period. Ability to restrict access to and to protect archived data as read-only, access security, deletion of in response to attack, and disaster recovery procedures. Factors to consider also include secure computer-generated time-stamped audit trail, data encryption, electronic signature controls, performance record of the vendor and the provided service, ability to monitor the vendor's compliance with security and data integrity controls, personnel training, facilities and maintenance, and vendor management. The sponsor or regulated entity is responsible for the authenticity and reliability of any data supporting a marketing application, and are ultimately responsible for ensuring that all required records are available to the FDA. Sponsors should establish service agreements with electronic service vendors. Prior to entering an agreement, an evaluation of the vendor should confirm their ability to meet Part 11 requirements and data security safeguards. Service level agreement should clearly describe vendor roles and responsibilities and specific requirements, including maintaining a validated state, data ownership both during and post-contract, and defining a process for addressing downtime and also short and long-term business continuity. Note that ongoing assessment of vendors through periodic reassessment is essential, and costs may be based on quantity of documents or quantity of users. FDA does not restrict geographic location of cloud computing services if proper controls are in place. Critical factors in risk assessment include understanding flow of the data, knowledge of hardware location, and impact of foreign data privacy laws. A key data privacy law to consider is the European Union General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, effective 25 May 2018, which applies to all businesses processing the personal data of subjects that are EU residents, not just to firms located in the EU. The regulation addresses accountability for secure processing of personal data, directs reporting of data breaches within 72 hours, and ensures transparency to individuals regarding whether their personal data is being processed, where, and for what purpose. In addition, privacy obligations specific to U.S. companies' protection of EU individuals' personal data is further addressed by the EU-US Privacy Shield. Each regulated facility using outsourced electronic services should have available to FDA upon request outsourced electronic service requirements, a service agreement defining vendor expectations, procedures for notification to sponsor of service changes and incidents. If required records are not available, FDA may decide to inspect electronic service vendors. It is preferable to avoid additional FDA inspections and potential 483s. The sponsor or regulated entity is ultimately responsible for the authenticity and reliability of data, and that outsourced electronic services are appropriately validated. The decision to validate should involve a risk-based approach. At minimum, sponsors should obtain from the vendor a description of SOPs and results of system testing and validation. In February 2015, FDA published its Mobile Medical Applications Guidance for Industry. Although mobile apps may or may not fit the description of a medical device, the 2015 Medical Applications Guidance specifically applies only to mobile apps that are medical devices and whose functionality could pose a risk to a patient's safety if the mobile app were not to function as intended. Applicable device requirements include annual establishment registration listing devices they market, investigational device exemption and labeling requirements, pre-market approval, and quality system regulation. With continuing rapid innovation, the recently issued Use of Electronic Records and Electronic Signatures in Clinical Investigations under 21 CFR Part 11, Questions and Answers Guidance further addresses mobile technology. Referring broadly to portable electronic technology, this guidance applies to mobile technology which enables remote data capture by clinical study participants, including mobile platforms, mobile apps, wearable biosensors, ingestible sensors, and portable or implantable electronic devices. This guidance applies regardless of whether the sponsor or study participant supplies the device. Similar expectations may be applied as current industry standard to mobile technology used under GLP and GMP situations. Examples include mobile phones, laptops, tablets, and scanners. Access controls are needed to ensure data entry by the study participant or authorized individual. In situations where access controls are impractical, a signed statement by the study participant agreeing that the device will only be used by the study participant may be employed. When a device is implanted or ingested, user access controls are not necessary. For an audit trail, each electronic data element should be linked to an authorized data originator. Examples of data originators include a human manually entering data. This requires limiting access through a user ID and password combination or biometrics. A mobile sensor transmitting data which cannot be altered. In this situation, the sensor is automatically identified as the data originator. Or an electronic health record, EHR, from a medical care provider transferring data. In the guidance electronic source data in clinical investigations, FDA has expressed they do not intend to assess medical care provider EHR systems for Part 11 compliance. The purpose and main use of EHR systems is for holding general medical care records. Part 11 takes effect upon transfer of data from an EHR into an EDC system. In this situation, the EHR is identified as the data originator. The sponsor is expected to maintain a list of authorized data originators and to maintain controls to ensure security of usernames, passwords, and biometric identifiers. To FDA, source data is data first recorded in a permanent manner. Mobile technology capturing data is considered temporary. Data transfer is complicated as it may pass through electronic gateways on the way to an EDC or EHR system. Therefore, the first permanent record is in the EDC or EHR rather than in the mobile technology. FDA does not intend to inspect mobile technology used for capturing and transmitting data. To FDA, the audit trail begins at the point the data is first recorded in a permanent manner in the EDC system for clinical or toxicology studies. The audit trail should include the date and time data entered the EDC, the data originator, the date and time the measurement was made, which may be earlier than the date time of entry into the EDC. Once transmitted to the EDC, only authorized persons may make changes, with the audit trail indicating date, time, data originator, user making the change, and a reason for the change. As always, modified data should not obscure previous entries. For data archival or submission to FDA, clinical investigators should review and electronically sign each electronic case report form, ECRF. As FDA encourages a risk-based approach to validation, validate mobile technology before use for reliability in data capture, transmission, and recording. Ensure devices and software updates do not impact data reliability. For performance of wearable mobile technology to measure specific biomarkers or physical activity, other regulations and policies may apply, but Part 11 does not. As security and confidentiality of data is critical, data must be encrypted both at rest and in transit. Data encryption may be sufficient for wearable biosensors or implantable devices. Additional user access controls are necessary for use of mobile apps or mobile platforms. Added security safeguards should include ability to wipe or disable remotely, disabling of installation or use of file sharing applications, firewalls, procedures for deletion of stored health records prior to discarding or reuse of a mobile device. As user training is critical to ensure reliability of data captured, user training on mobile technology should be completed before use and whenever changes are made to the mobile technology. Training needs should also be reassessed throughout use for more complex mobile technology which poses a higher risk. When telecommunication systems such as telephones or live chats are used for interactive real-time interactions, Part 11 regulations do not apply. But when these systems are used to record source data, enabling later review, there must be adequate controls to ensure reliability, confidentiality, and privacy of records, and also to ensure user authentication and prevention of alteration. Regarding electronic signatures, the clinical investigator should ensure the study participant signing understands the legal significance of their electronic signature. Although FDA does not specify the method used, the identity of the individual signing through electronic signature must be verified, for example, through a government-issued identification card or passport. There should be safeguards to prevent signature fraud. Biometric use should be based on government and industry standards. Such standards are developed by various organizations and government agencies. For example, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the International Committee for Information Technology Standards, and others. To wrap up this training session, the Part 11 draft guidance was published in June 2017 and addresses newer technologies such as outsourced electronic services and mobile technology. The FDA continues to maintain a narrow, practical, risk-based approach to electronic records. As FDA QRC is committed to customer service, we welcome your honest feedback and have made the process as easy as possible for you. It will only take a few seconds for you to help us be better. Upon receipt of your survey, FDA QRC will send you a certificate as documentation of your training completion.